Okay, well then with that, I'm going to move into cable television rates. Maybe not an exciting subject, but I think it's something that means a lot to us, and there's a lot of dollars at stake, so I want to talk about it. I think that for any of you who listened to Bob Dale's Get Up and Go show, he previewed the annual meetings and the health fair last Thursday. And what he said, I think he put it best when he said, I think people think that they look at their cable bill and go, it's $40, it's $50, it's $60, and oh my gosh, Pioneer must be making all kinds of money on that. And then he said, but they're not, because they've got to pay the programmers. And I think he hit the nail on the head. And so I don't know that Bob's in here, I think he's probably doing radio coverage out in the health fair, but I probably owe him lunch because he teed up my presentation perfectly. So I want to talk about the cost of programming. I want to talk about everything that goes into it. I want to give you the facts about it from our standpoint. What I will tell you is that when it comes down to actually telling you the amount of money we pay each programmer, I can't do that. Every single agreement that we have with these programmers have a non-disclosure agreement, and that non-disclosure piece tells me that I cannot share with anybody outside the company just what it costs for the programming. I mean, there's lots of purposes for that. I think that, ESPN and Fox Sports and ABC and NBC and everybody else don't want everybody to know just how much money we turn around and pay them, but it's a big deal, so I want to talk about it in the most abstract terms I can to help drive home what we're talking about. Just to give you a little bit of background, we pay millions of dollars to these guys. I mean, and we're a small company. We pay millions of dollars, and over the last 10 years, that amount has doubled. So it's becoming a big deal, and I think it's something that you as consumers need to really take note of and do a little bit of research and actually educate and know where your money is going when you pay for a cable television bill. Because it's not just the case for us, it's the case for every other cable programmer. It's the case for Dish TV, for DirecTV, for Cox, for Time Warner. Everybody has the same basic cost in programming. So what I will do is I will give you some non-programming factors as well before I actually start talking about the dollars associated with the programmers. So as you will see, that these are what I'm going to call the non-programming. This is just factors that have to do with what we charge and what programming we can put on our cable television system. So one is our cable system size. And by size, I don't mean the size of our footprint or the number of customers. I mean the actual size of the amount of spectrum that we have with our cable television system. It's limited. We can't put every single channel out there onto our cable system. We just can't. We don't have the room to do it. Different channels take up different sizes. Obviously, HD channels, if you think about it, and the clarity and the amount of really great picture quality they give you, it takes up a lot more than a standard def channel does. So there is a limit to how many stations we can put on. That being said, we are doing things and technically tweaking our network so that we can put more programming on, which, as some of you will have seen, especially some of you in the western side of our territory, first Big Bow and Ridgefield, we've done a conversion where we're turning over to digital. And digital, basically what it does for us is it opens up the size of our system and allows us to put more channels on. For us, it's a capital intensive project, and so we're choosing to do it community by community. For those of you from Rolla, you would have gotten letters outlining this process. Johnson is up next. Everybody else will happen community by community over probably the next 15 months. We're aiming to be done with this project by the middle of next year. So when that happens, once we have everybody converted over to digital, we actually have more space on which to put channels, which gives us more variety. And hopefully we can give you guys different offerings and different packages. We're also a small system in that we only have 10,000 subs. We only have 10,000 people subscribing to our cable television service, which means if I go into somebody's office like an ESPN or a Fox News or a CNN, I walk in, I don't have much juice. I've got 10,000 people. I've got 10,000 TV sets that I'm delivering to them. They're like, yeah, whatever. We want to go talk to Time Warner and Comcast, who have millions and hundreds of millions of subscribers. So the problem with that is that a lot of times they ignore us. They don't give us as good of deals. They look at you and say, you only have 10,000 subs. If you could deliver me 50,000 subs, I might give you a break. I might charge you less. And so that's another thing that's going against us. Additionally, we have this thing called tiering. So if you think about your cable television, you have different packages. You have basic, and you have advanced basic, and you have digital tiers, and you have HD tiers. And all of those tiers play into something called tiering, because what the cable companies come and tell us when we go negotiate this agreement is, we'll give you the signal. and we'll even give it to you for a price that's an okay price. But we want to be on the part of your system that most people take, which for us is going to be your basic tier. So they want to be on the basic tier, otherwise we can't put their actual programming on our cable system. Well, that's all fine until you get to a point where you're now totally full up with programming. That's kind of a problem because now I don't have any more space on my basic tier, which means you're not going to give me your signal because you can't be on the basic tier. That's a big problem. So all of these contracts contain that language. And again, going back to the size of our company, we don't have a lot of leverage to actually have those conversations and get them to move things out of those tiers. And then we have tying. Tying is where they tie channels together. Because we all know that ESPN doesn't just have ESPN. They have ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic. And by gosh, if you want ESPN, you have to take all 4 of them. And you have to take all 4 of them at a particular cost, and you have to put them all together. And you have to put them on your basic tier, and you have to put them under channel 40. Pretty great, right? So it doesn't give us a lot of choice, is my point. And so when you start tying channels together, all of a sudden you start taking up space in your basic programming, number one. And then you also start to raise your basic cable rate, because all of a sudden you have ESPN2, ESPN News, and ESPN Classic that all have to be there, which means part of your basic cable rate is made up of that money that's going to those companies. And then there's also costs that are associated with something other than programming. Things like your set-top box. Obviously, those set-top boxes aren't cheap, so there's capital invested in that. There's also programming pieces of your set-top box and the programming that it takes to maintain those on a monthly basis. And there's also a charge for the guide. For those of you that have a DVR or a digital box where you have a guide, an interactive guide that comes up, there's also a cost per subscriber per month for that. So all of those things add in addition to the cost of the programming. So to talk about programming, obviously the non-disclosure, so I'm not going to be able to tell you we pay X number of dollars per month per subscriber for ESPN. But again, like I said, there's some outside independent research that I'll be able to show you that kind of give you an idea. We have some free channels on our system that we don't have to pay programmers to get, which I'm going to tell you is under the number 7. So take with that what you want, but obviously when you're talking about 70 plus channels on a basic tier and less than 7 of them are free, all the rest of them we're paying for. We have cheap channels, and the cheap channels I'm talking about 30 cents per subscriber per month to about $1 per subscriber per month. We have moderate, which I have from $1 to $2. We have what I'm calling expensive, which is above $2, and then we have exorbitant, which is above $5. And based on my comments I've already said, I'll let you guess who fits into what category. So I'm going to show you this graph, and I know it's going to be kind of hard to read, but what I want to make the point is on the very left-hand side, you have C-SPAN, which is at 6 cents per subscriber per month. And then you start moving into the Weather Channel that they have listed, and this comes from the New York Times. This is not our system, but it's very closely, could be very closely related to our system, I'll say that. So then you have the Weather Channel at 18 cents per sub, or 13 cents. You have Comedy Central at 18 cents. You have MSNBC at 21 cents. You have Bravo at 24, TBS at 59 cents, ESPN2 at 70 cents, TNT at $1.24, and then you have ESPN as the outlier on the right at $5.54. So, like I said, those aren't our exact rates, but I'll tell you it pretty closely mirrors what we're looking at when we take our programming costs and look at them. So all the channels you have fall on that. What I'll tell you is that channels that are more popular tend to be in that middle range, and channels that have sports content tend to be on the right-hand side. Sports content in general is more expensive than anything else on our cable system. We also have to pay for broadcast channels. We have to pay for ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, CW, MNTV, and Univision. Those are all broadcast stations. It hasn't always been the case that we've paid for those. We haven't seen it since, we've only seen paying for them since 2009. Historically, broadcast channels were over the air. As you all know, it was free over the air television. They got the spectrum on which to operate free from the government, so it was free. What cable companies started to do was to take that off the air and insert it onto their cable systems and send it out to their customers. And so in 1992, Congress changed the rules of the game and told broadcast channels, you can charge. We'll go ahead and let you charge. There was a long period of time that they didn't start charging until about 10 years after that 92 Act passed. And so it wasn't until about 2002 that you really saw broadcasters start to charge for their channels. We didn't see it until 2009. That was the first day or the first year that we actually saw charges for some of those channels. And it wasn't all of them. It was just a few of them here, and a few of them the next year, and a few of them the next year. Now we have them all charging, with the exception of PBS. So what I did is I pulled a bill for you, and for those of you that receive a cable bill from us, this is much what it looks like. I've obviously blacked out the name and statement number and account number, but you'll notice what I've highlighted in yellow is the broadcast retransmission fee at $7.25. That $7.25 is what it costs us per month to provide those broadcast channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, et cetera, to you. We don't keep a dime of that. We give all of that to the broadcasters. So what I will point out to you is that in 2009, when you first saw that line appear on your bill, it was $1.45. Today, it's $7.25. It's a 400% increase in 5 years, which obviously cost of programming is far outpacing any other growth factor that you can look at. That's a problem. So that's why you're seeing things like the KSN and Cox fight, which I'm sure most of you have seen. Most of you probably watch NBC. You watch NBC at lunchtime, they've got the crawl going across the screen that looks like this. Attention Cox Communication customers, if we don't come to an agreement by 4 p.m. on March 14th, you probably won't get to watch NBC anymore. By law, they can't carry it. So between that and the ads that you saw this with the very ominous, you're not going to be able to watch your programming airing during blockbuster type of programming like The Voice, then you're going, okay, what's going on here? Well, my guess, I'm not privy, I've talked to my friends at Cox, but while I'm not privy and they can't tell you what kind of numbers they were talking about, my guess is that KSN came into Cox and said, it's time to renegotiate your contract and we want more money. My guess is that Cox was probably paying KSN somewhere in the 50 cents, 60 cents per subscriber per month range. And my guess, based on some anecdotal evidence and knowledge that we have from some other cable companies, KSN probably came in and said, I want $1.50 a month per sub. And at that point, KSN is obviously asking for a ginormous increase, and Cox is going, no, we're not going to pay that for you. And that's where you start to get into these battles where all of a sudden KSN has control of the actual programming that you're going to see, even though it's on Cox's system. And they're going, you better call Cox and tell them you don't want to lose your local programming. It's already being paid for in your local rate and all of these other things, obviously trying to color it onto their side. So again, you're going to see these things happen, and you're seeing it happen more and more. For any of you who are reading trade association or trade press or any sort of newspapers from outside of our area, you're seeing it happen. You just saw it happen not too long ago, I believe with Comcast or Direct with the Weather Channel, where they were pulling the Weather Channel off. You saw it happen where somebody didn't get to see the Super Bowl because they got blacked out because they were having this basically disagreement about what the actual rate of the programming should be. So you're seeing it happen more and more often, and I have a feeling that you're just going to see it heat up. The end of this year marks the start of the new retransmission consent cycle. So you may see some press about that, but basically what that means, it starts the new negotiations for cable companies with broadcasters, with ABC, NBC, and CBS. So at the end of this year, we'll start negotiating with them about the price that we pay them for their programming. The biggest problem that I have seen over the last couple of years is that KSN station used to be locally owned in Wichita. It's no longer locally owned in Wichita. It's now owned by a conglomerate, by Lynn Media, who owns a whole bunch of stations all over the place. Attorneys in New York City, they don't really care. They don't care if Southwest Kansas gets KSN or not. They really care about how much money can I squeeze out of you and how much money will you pay me for this signal. So it's become extremely frustrating, but it's also put us in a place where you can't even negotiate any longer. So I'll tell you right now, I'm not really looking forward to the end of this year when we start negotiating with these guys. What I want to show you now is a graph that I pulled out of a piece of trade press called All Things D. What it shows is the amount of money going to broadcasters over a 7-year period. What they show is that a lot of companies started being charged in 2006 at 21 cents per subscriber per month, and that in 2013 that had jumped to $3.02 per subscriber per month. 7 years, 1,338% increase. That's huge. Again, far outpacing any other growth mechanism that you could even look at in the US, CPI, anything else. So it's becoming a real problem. You look at those things, and that makes you even more fearful for going in and talking to these guys at the end of the year, and more fearful about what it does to our bill and our end users. So while the broadcasters are somewhat new to charging, the rest of the cable companies aren't. And so the question is, what do they do with that money? And again, like I said, sports broadcasters have a tendency to be the worst. And so what I'm going to do is look at ESPN's revenue for 2013. ESPN had a total revenue of about $10 billion in 2013. And what this chart is showing you is where that $10 billion comes from. That blue piece of the pie, $6.5 billion, comes from end user revenue. It comes from what you all are paying on your local cable television bill. That money comes to the cable company. That money then gets paid to ESPN, and it makes up about $6.5 billion. So 2/3 of their revenue comes from all of us sitting in this room and everybody else who pays any sort of amount of money for cable television or satellite or whatever source that you get it from. So what's ESPN do with it? They obviously buy sports programming. They paid the NFL $15.2 billion for the rights to Monday Night Football. They paid $5.6 billion to Major League Baseball for baseball programming, and they paid $7.3 billion to the NCAA for a 12-year deal to broadcast the college football playoffs. It's a lot of money. And I don't know that ESPN would say this, but in my opinion, ESPN goes out and makes the best deal that they possibly can, which means we're going to pay as much money as we absolutely have to get that programming because we want that sports programming. We'll figure out where that money comes from later. Where's the money come from later? Well, 2/3 of it is going to come from us, everybody sitting in this room who subscribes to cable television. That's where 2/3 of it will come from. So that's infuriating to me. And I'm a huge sports fan. I love sports. I love watching ESPN, but I do cuss them on a regular basis. You can ask my husband. So I do want to say, remember that when you see your next favorite NFL player sign a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. Because a lot of those dollars that go to the NFL go to the teams. From the teams, go to pay your quarterback $5 million to play this year. A lot of that money is coming out of your pocket, is my point. So it's kind of a big deal. What I will say is that there is a website called tvonmyside.com. When you go visit it, you have to put your zip code in. Your zip code will then lead you to Pioneer Communications specific content. And that content will give you informational pieces about cable television programming. It gives you a lot of the things that I've said in writing. It gives you a lot of that background. It gives you an explanation of programming costs. It gives you updates on any sort of programming disputes that might be happening. Right now, we're in the middle of having a conversation with Viacom, which MTV Networks and some others. We're not in a position where we're going to be losing networks, but it's a pretty heated negotiation and they want a whole bunch of money. So we're doing what we can to be as transparent as we can and give you as much information about those pieces as we can. It also gives you any sort of explanation of disputes if we are actually truly in a dispute, and it has a frequently asked questions section, which again gives you answers to a lot of these questions that I've been queuing up. So to conclude, we really have very little control. I mean, as we talk about tiering and tying and the size of our company and everything else, we really have very little control over what those rates ultimately end up being. And those rates for our basic cable have to keep pace. I think that, if you talk to any of the board and you talk to me, we tell you we can't offer a product that operates at a loss, which is why you continue to see increases in your basic cable rate, because we have to be able to at least pay these programming rates. Not to mention there's other pieces behind it. I mean, given we do also offer other services, so luckily we can spread things like labor and back office costs throughout other pieces of our company. But when it comes down to it, programming is the single biggest piece of cable television costs. So again, what can we do? I mean, right now we're spending a lot of time working with Congress just because, frankly, at this point, they're the only people that can change the game. The FCC, even though it regulates us on the telephone side, they have very light touch regulation on cable television, so they can't do anything about it. It has to come from Congress. Now, if ESPN's making $10 billion a year, who do you think has the better paid lobbyist? Probably ESPN. Who's shoving more money into Washington, D.C.? It's the big guys. It's the programmers who don't want to see this system go away. So it's very hard for us to continue to advocate at Congress and to get them to actually listen to our side and be at all sympathetic. And so ultimately what we have to do is we have to take it and paint it as a picture. It has nothing to do with all of these things. It has to do with the exorbitant amount of programming cost end users are subject to paying just to have basic television service. So we do that. We spend a lot of time in Washington. We work with our national associations. We have several national associations, some really related only to cable television, some related to telephone and cable television. We spend a lot of time with them, trying to get them to engage and getting them to do things again at the national level to help us out in Washington. We do try to keep our costs as low as possible. We try to negotiate the best deal. But I will also tell you that I don't think you want me to negotiate a deal that doesn't include KSN on your cable system, because everybody watches NBC. You watch it for your local news, you watch it for The Voice, you watch it for Revolution or whatever other TV series happens to pick your interest. I mean, you can't not have KSN on your system, but we will negotiate as best as we possibly can, and we do have other similarly situated cable companies that we do work with through a larger association to do some of the bigger national negotiations to help us out with that, to hopefully then they don't just bring 10,000 customers, they bring 500 systems of 10,000 customers to hopefully get a little bit better deal on programming. And we will continue to do as much playing of hardball as we can with the programmers, which what I'm prepping you for is probably something much like you saw with the Cox KSN, where you started to see some of those ads like this and like this as they were getting towards the end of their retransmission consent period. Because we aren't just going to roll over, we're going to do the best we possibly can, but sometimes it's going to come down to this. And KSN may put a crawl, I don't know if they care about us, but they may end up putting a crawl that says, hey, Pioneer Communications customers, you better contact your phone company or your cable company and tell them you want to keep us. And so the point of telling you all of this is to give you that background information so that you know what you're seeing and why you're seeing it. Again, that TV on my side will be continually updated as we start to go through some of these things so that you can have that information and hopefully be a well-informed consumer. With that, what I will do is take any questions. First off, if you have questions about cable television programming. And yes, Mary Kay asked if Cox settled. Yeah. So we were watching very closely, and at about 3:40 yesterday afternoon, KSN updated their website that said, hey, great news, you get to keep KSN. Thanks for all your help, subscribers. And didn't obviously pull their signal. Now, I haven't yet talked to any of my friends at Cox. I figured they were somewhat, had some bigger irons in the fire on Friday than to be hearing from me to ask them how their negotiations were going. But next week, I'm going to touch base with them and see what we can get from them. Again, they can't tell me what they were asking for, and they can't tell me how much they ended up settling for, but we're pretty good at reading body language, so we'll see where we get. But they did settle, and so Cox customers still have KSN. Now, question will be what their basic rate is going into the next rate increase. Rita?
Would you recommend that everybody in this room contact their legislators and let them know that they're not happy with the way things are going?
That'd be great. I wasn't going to pull that out because right now there is no piece of legislation. There's no vehicle to do it yet in Congress. However, if you're at a town hall meeting with Tim Huelskamp or Jerry Moran or whomever, and you can say, hey, I got a concern about cable television rates, and based on what I know, it really isn't my cable company, it's the programmers behind it, and there's some bigger issues that only you guys can take care of. And we have really good relationships with both Congressman Huelskamp and Senator Moran and Senator Roberts from this area so that we can have those conversations with them. So all it would take is a little nudge from you, and then I can follow up and give more of the technical piece of it. But yeah, no, any interaction that you'd have with them would be great.
Yes?
Yes, I was wondering, one way to phrase this, but if I remember correctly, is ESPN owned by ABC Disney, and also isn't all this connected to the internet, that some of these companies own large sections of the pipe of the internet?
They do.
As well, this is all possible. We need to all keep our attention on what's going on in the whole grand picture,
Right.
because it looks, things I'm looking at, it looks like they may just shut us down one of these days.
Well, and you start talking about ABC, Disney, and ESPN, yes, all being owned by the same parent company, but there's also pieces of where you have programmers and cable companies under common ownership, which start to then also press down on this. It really, in my opinion, if you really want my opinion, you start to enter some antitrust situations where you start talking about ownership shares and you start talking about just how much price fixing or market control is going on. And I really do think that you could make an antitrust argument out of this. And I think at some point Congress will have to address it before it gets to that, before it gets to a court case.
Well, there's also this issue that in a lot of places, like in Wichita, you can still put an antenna up. That's where we've had that going out here.
Exactly, and that's why, and we actually, to be fully honest, ABC, NBC, CBS, we pick up all of those feeds in Garden City on our fiber that Cox hauls out from Wichita Forest, and we pay Cox to do that. Not that ABC, NBC, CBS care about that, but we can't pull that signal off the air. So we have to pay to get the signal out here, and pay them for the signal. I mean, it's the devil of living where we're at, but in the same light, it's not just our fight; it's every cable company's fight. Larry.
Kathy, we live in the country and so we use satellite, but I've been curious and I guess you guys have different packages. How do you determine how to package those? Pricing point for the customer I know is important in that consideration. Just give us a quick response there if you can.
Sure. Larry was asking about how we determine what packages are and price points and whatnot. And frankly, Larry, we don't build in a majority of our back office cost into the cable programming cost when we go say, okay, here's our basic tier, which a lot of times for us is going to be driven by that tiering and tying piece that says, if you want to take us, you have to have us in the basic tier, and we have to be next to this channel, this channel, and this channel. That's frankly really how we built that basic tier. So you include obviously the most popular channels and then the broadcasters. And so once we do that, we don't build all of our back office costs and labor into that price point. What we do is we try to keep it as true as we can to what the programmers are charging you for cable television. And part of that, I mean, that's not what you would consider a real business decision. It's really a cooperative decision. It's a cooperative decision knowing that you guys are all member owners and that you all have a piece in this. So let's give you the best possible deal that we can. And that's what we do. What I'd really like to do, frankly, is do it much like a sushi menu for those of you who like sushi. You get a paper menu that has everything on there that the sushi chef, say that 6 times fast, the sushi chef will make you, and he gives you a pencil and says, okay, now mark down. And so you're like, I want 1 piece of this and 2 pieces of this and 3 pieces of this, and okay, here you go. That's what I'd like your cable television to be. I'd like you to come in and say, I want, my gosh, I love ESPN, I want Fox Sports, I want the Food Network, and I want HGTV. That's my lineup. That's what I want, and that's what I'm going to pay for, and I've got $25 a month, and there you go. That's ideally what we'd like to do, but again, we're prevented from doing any of that. It used to be you had some system issues where you couldn't do that because of how the head end was set up and how the signal was delivered to your house. But the case is now that everybody has these boxes in their house and they're fully addressable, so we could do that. Technically, we can do that now. The bigger problem is that we can't do it because of what they tell us that we can and can't do with it. And ESPN will tell you too, ESPN will say, if not everybody in the basic tier was taking us at what they were showing, $5.54 a month, then that means if you want ESPN and all of a sudden I only have 1/3 of the subscribers or 1/4 of the subscribers, that means it's probably $15 a month. But then again, shouldn't the person who really wants ESPN pay the $15 a month? And not everybody pay for it if you don't want to watch it? So again, that's another piece of it. A la carte is, and that's called a la carte pricing, a la carte programming, and that's been a big issue here over the past 5 years in Congress, but they've never gotten it to a point that we've been able to offer it. Because yeah, ideally that would be the case.
We still don't have it in the rural areas? We still don't?
No, cable television, we've stuck just to technically city limits or expanded to city limits if you've got a lot of people living outside, and that's a cost. It's simply a cost matter. It's way too expensive if there's only 1 subscriber that's going to take it in the country, or 3 or 4 subscribers. The amount of plant that it takes to get it there is just cost prohibitive. We would eventually like to be able to do something over the broadband network where you're offering a limited basic of 5 or 6 channels of your local channels and whatnot to make it complementary towards what most people are getting for a dish or a direct programming. But again, that's still a capital outlay for us, and we've got to figure that out.
If you don't have TV, do you still have to pay that extra?
No, if you don't have cable television,
I don't have anything.
okay, then none of it applies. Then none of it, yeah, though, then none of this applies. There are no other costs built in anywhere else in our business. There's no cost built in on the phone side that cross-subsidizes this or supports this. It really is, if you have cable television, it applies.